Hello and welcome to this video where we're going to have a go at cutting out very fine detail with the Selector Mask. What is also pretty good is that we can begin this work from a raw smart object, and I've got an image opened on screen that we're going to work with here. There's not a great deal of editing being done to this. I've been into my lens corrections, remove chromatic aberration and enable profile corrections, but as you can see in the basic tab there's just a little bit of whites and a little bit of exposure, which is what you would expect from a studio portrait. So as you can see with the button at the bottom left, I'm going to open this up as a smart object. So let's make a start in cutting this young lady out from the background. I'm going to go to my Select menu. After all, we're going to make a selection with Selector Mask. So Selector Mask is our choice. When we go over to the right hand side, just take a look at the transparency. Generally it's set to 50% as a default, and we can leave that there. We have a number of different ways to be able to view this, and we can view it on black, on white, and a number of other ways too, but for this job we're going to choose onion skin. The edge detection we can see here, and also the global refinements, they don't seem to have any bearing on what we're about to do with our young lady. We need to go to the other side of the screen and we need to select the tool right at the top. This is our quick selection tool, and it works with a brush, although it doesn't look too much like a brush at the moment. I'll use my square bracket keys to make the brush a little bigger, and what I'm going to do is to paint over the lady to reveal the parts that I want to select. You can see this is a very fast job. You can also see the brush has a little plus in the center of it. If at any time things go a little wrong, then you can go to the top left of the screen and you'll notice there's a minus there as well. But it's much quicker if you can remember the Alt key, because when I touch and hold the Alt key, you can see my selection tool changes to a minus. Hopefully we won't need it here, but it's there should we need to. Now that doesn't look too bad, but we can still see we've got some problems around the edge. If I move over to the right hand side just for a moment and I push up that transparency, now you can see the edge is a little bit ragged, and that's what we've got to deal with next. So what I'm going to do here is to pick up the next tool, and the next one, if I just stop my cursor over the top, is called Refine Edge Brush Tool, and that's exactly what it's going to do. It's going to refine the edge for us. Once I've selected the Refine Edge brush, I'm going to zoom into the image a little bit. That should be enough. We're working with another brush, so I'm going to make this brush a little bit bigger. You can see the size of the brush being increased up in the top left as I use those square bracket keys. I'm going to make the brush fairly big, and I'm going to brush around the edge, trying to keep that plus just outside of the hair, because this is the area that I need to refine. Generally speaking, I do a little way and I allow the software to catch up. Now straight away I can see a little bit of a problem here. We can always repair that pretty easily because we've got another tool here. This is just the solid brush. So when I pick this brush up, I can make an appropriate size and I can just paint back in there the pixels that I'm going to need to select. But we do need to pick up again the Refine Edge brush because I need to go around the entire edge. I'll do it a little bit at a time, and you can see the hair is gradually being refined by Photoshop. A little bit of a problem there which we can repair in a moment. But let's go back to the top now. Where did I start? Somewhere around here, so it's down the edge. There's hair all the way down there, and certainly down here into that little gap there. But I think we've more or less got it. If we take the shoulder here, I think we may have a little bit there, but I think it's going to be difficult with that dark area because that's the strap of her dress, so we may have to do just a little bit of work there. But for the demonstration we're doing here, let's take a look at that. Now there was one area which I wasn't keen on, just down here, so let me pick up my brush here. If I just hover over the brush, you'll see the tooltip pop up. It's just called the brush tool, and we have that in a plus and a minus. So once I select that, then I can carefully go along the edge of a shoulder line, because it should be dark there. It's certainly not the background. I'll hit Control 0 and we can fit the image on screen. Now just for a moment, let me go back to my properties over on the right hand side, and I'm going to change the view mode to on white. Now the reason we're not seeing pure white there is because we've got the opacity at 50%. So if I push that up to the maximum, you can see we do still have a problem with the hair. We may have one or two little areas that we'd like to refine still further, but the hair is also bringing through some of the pixels or some of the color from the original background, which we can see if we take the opacity fully off. So look at the hair. I'm going to go down to my output settings and open them up. I'm going to tick the box to decontaminate the colors, and we see a massive improvement. What I'd like to do next is to just zoom in on this area here. Now perhaps if I go back to the refine edge brush, and I'll drop the brush down a little bit, but I'm just going to refine over the edge of those just a little more. You can see where they are. Looks like I'm getting about as best I can from this. Looking around here, it looks okay, that looks okay, and that looks okay. Control 0 will fit this on screen. What I'm going to do is go down to the output now, and from the output options we do have a number of choices. I'm going to choose to create a new layer with layer mask. Because I'm working from a smart object, it's not going to allow me to select all of the others anyway. So I'm going to select that option and click OK. You can see exactly what Photoshop does. It does leave us with our original raw file. It provides us with a JPEG equivalent, and of course the mask. So now we need to sort of, I suppose, test the cutout that we've made by putting in a new background. I can do that by creating a new blank layer down at the bottom just to the left of the bin, and I can drag that just beneath the young lady and sandwich the two together with this one, which will provide a new background. Now I've got black and white in the bottom of the toolbox on the left, so I suppose the first thing we could try is Alt Backspace, which is black, and I think for most people that would pass muster. But of course it does depend what you want to do with the image. If you intended to print the image 4-foot tall, then perhaps there may be some evidence there if we look carefully enough. I'll zoom in on the right hand side, but as you can see, it doesn't look too bad at all. And if I open this up and just presented this to you, I think you would accept that as a straight shot. Now I think the most damning test we can possibly do with this young lady is to flood the background with white. Control Backspace will do that. Now I think when we put white as our background, then if we look really carefully, I think there is one or two areas which we'd either want to go back and see if we could refine still further, but if we couldn't, then we would have a little bit of evidence perhaps that some Photoshop work has been done. The reason we can see the problem against white, of course, is because of the colour that was in the original background. Not quite black, but very close to it. So it follows that if we replace the background with black, then it's going to look at its best. But why would we do that? Because we almost had that to start with. So let's create a different background and finish this little project. So once I have my image on screen, let's go over to the left hand side and perhaps click the color picker. I'm going to select maybe a mid-grey for most of the background. I'll select that and I'll flood that using Alt backspace. But then I was going to do a little bit of gradient work around the edge with the gradient tool, but I'll use black for that. So I'll switch to black, but I won't put the gradients onto my background layer. I'll create another new layer for that. So if things don't go according to plan, I can just drop that in the bin and have another go. I'm going to drop the size of my image down just a little bit, just so that I can drag in from out here somewhere. I'm going to pick up the gradient. From the options at the top of the screen, I want the linear mode, which is the default. And from this option, I want foreground to transparent, which is this one that shows those little blue and white checkerboard effects. Now I can put a bit of a graduation on the background. That looks okay. Maybe I'll bring in just a light one on the left hand side, a little bit there, a little bit there. You can see by doing that we can actually make quite an attractive background, certainly better than it was, and it looks quite acceptable against those tones. Now of course we've got the opportunity to get creative with the color. We can always put those two layers together once we're happy with the gradient and then add a bit of color to it. So let me select both of those layers, then right click and just merge those two together. So now I can apply a little bit of color. There's a couple of ways we can do this. Now one of the ways is via the Hue and Saturation Palette. We can find that with Control U or Image, Adjustment and Hue and Saturation. This is the sort of panel I use sometimes to apply a sepia. So if I tick the box to add color, you can see it picks up the color that's the default color, which is in our case down in the reds there. I'll push up the saturation so I can make an evaluation, but I can always drop that down in a moment. And we just move along and we see if we can find something here which we feel is assisting the image. And as soon as I get to the blues, it starts to appeal to me. I don't want to go too far. Something like that, and then I could drop that saturation to make it a little bit more neutral. I'll click OK just for the moment. Now if we save this as a Photoshop file, of course we could come back in the cold light of tomorrow, look at this again and decide if the blue still works. But it does work fairly well because blue tends to recede into the background and warmer colours tend to come to the fore, so it's working for us here. Now I've just hit Ctrl Z to remove the hue and saturation from the layer because there is another way we can do this. It amounts to the same thing, but I'll quickly demonstrate it anyway. We can create a new blank layer over the top of the background, and we could perhaps even think about a gradient. Let's do that. Let's go to the color picker at the bottom of the toolbar, click. I'll move up to the blues because they did seem to work pretty well here. I'll pick the first one and click OK. Now I'm going to select the background color and I'm going to pick the blues again. In fact, I'll pick this one. See how we can pick the previous color, because what I'd like to do is just move it a little bit this way. And OK that. So we've got two-tone blue there. Whether it's going to make a massive difference, we'll soon find out. Let's select our gradient. We can switch the operation now from foreground to background, and I could do this from top to bottom, or I could even do it from corner to corner. It's not making a great deal of difference, so I'm going to darken my foreground even more and do it again. This is the great thing of working on layers. I think I'd even like the background a little bit lighter, so you can see how I can duck and dive here to get the effect I'm looking for. There, something like that. Now we can use the colour with our gradient if we blend it with one of these modes. Try some of them, but my favourite here is colour. As you can see, it does look very similar to what we saw before, but we've also got the opportunity to drop the opacity of that layer, so perhaps we can say, you know, the control is a little bit better here. We don't want the background so blue that it's competing with the lady. So we've got lots of options here, but at some stage, of course, we would select those layers, right click, and maybe merge them, because there is one other thing perhaps we should be thinking of doing. Now, computer generated colour can often look a little unnatural, and it doesn't always look very nice when it's printed, because in actual fact it's too smooth. It doesn't have any pixels within it as the photographic parts of our image does. So I usually add just a tiny bit of noise into the background. Not only does it look better when it's printed, or even when it's viewed on screen, but also it marginally makes the cutout a little more acceptable. So a little bit of a win-win here. So let's go to our filters menu and select noise, add noise. I want Gaussian monochrome noise, and I don't want anything like that. I probably will try 1% to start with. You can see that's pretty minimal. 2% usually starts to get close, but of course 3% generally is just about right here. Click OK, Control 0. Now, throughout this technique I've had a smart raw image sitting at the bottom of the layered stack, but I have to tell you that on this occasion it's of limited value. What I'd hoped, and I've been doing a little bit of an experiment while recording this video, what I hoped was that I could possibly copy the mask from this image once the work was done and drop it onto the smart object in case I wanted to make a change. But the technique doesn't work quite like that. So this can now go in the bin. I'm going to hit the delete key to get rid of that, because we need both the image and the mask to be able to create the select and mask effect. Now, of course, at some stage we would expect to flatten all these together, but there was that one little area around the chin of the model where perhaps there was a little bit of work to do. Let me make a selection here to show you what I had in mind. If we look at her shoulder, it sort of comes up here, and I suspect it does something like this, which means that that part in there, I'll just join up, that part in there really could do with a little bit of work. But of course we've got a layer mask here, so it wouldn't be a problem at all to do this little section here a bit more carefully, even if we did it manually. Now, I've just done a tiny amount of work just under the lady's chin with the mask, a little bit carefully, but it works pretty well, and of course at some stage we would flatten the image to complete it. Making effective selections is an important part of Photoshop. There's a number of different ways that we can cut out various subjects from our images. This is probably one of the best for fine detail.